What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here, and back to review Evil Dead Burn, the sequel that's not quite a sequel to the 2023 smash hit Evil Dead Rise. The movie gives us a brand new cast of characters either getting possessed by or torn limb from limb by the Deadites. It's violent, it's gory, it's aggressive, and it features one or two standout moments where I was grinning like an idiot due to a particularly gruesome special effect. But I'm sad to report I think this is the weakest entry in the Evil Dead franchise, and if you include Ash vs. Evil Dead, and I absolutely do, there have been 7 Evil Dead projects over the years, although a case could be made for 7.5 if you include Within the Woods, the 30-minute short film that Sam Raimi made back in 1978, as a proof of concept for potential investors in the original Evil Dead. But if you love this series as much as I do, and I have my original DVD for Evil Dead here, where I have to be very gentle because it's falling apart. This replication of the Necronomicon is like, you can see there's like foam underneath, but all the plastic or latex on the front is starting to peel off. In any event, it's like a treasured relic in my home. In any case, if you love the Evil Dead franchise as much as I do, you can pretty much find something to love or admire or praise in every single entry in the series.
Queen of Spades. 4 of Hearts. 8 of Spades. 2 Spades. Jack of Diamonds. Jack of Clubs.
And the collaborations between Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell, I think, are some of the most effortlessly rewatchable horror movies and shows ever made. But Evil Dead Burn, this was the first movie for me in the series that felt disposable, felt like an empty cash grab, and it better make some cash because Evil Dead Wrath is already in the works and coming our way in 2028. Now, don't get me wrong, if you just want to see gore, Evil Dead Burn has got you covered. There's so much gore, in fact, that in the latter half of the movie, you might even get a little bit numb to it, but what this movie is missing is horror, fear, suspense, dread, or any of the other amazing emotions you might feel when watching a good horror movie. But perhaps the most unforgivable absence in the movie is the lack of humor, but not for lack of trying. There's one recurring joke in the movie, I won't spoil it, but there's a recurring joke involving an old lady, and this line she keeps saying. It's not funny the first time, and it's definitely not funny like the 10th or 15th time she says the same line again and again and again. And for me, weird, dark humor and physical comedy and great one-liners have always been a key component to this series, and I really missed it with Evil Dead Burn.
Yo, she-bitch. Let's go.
But the most obvious ingredient that Evil Dead Burn is missing is a good screenplay. The characters in this movie either have no personality at all, or what little personality they have is all bad. And as far as I'm concerned with any horror movie, if you don't either love or hate the characters in the story, well, it's really tough to care about what might happen to them over the course of the story. But if you're wondering about the premise, here it is as written over on IMDb. After the loss of her husband, a woman seeks solace with her in-laws. As one by one they transform into deadites, she comes to discover that the vows she took in life survive even in death. And I would argue that the first part of that premise is more or less accurate, but the second part doesn't really reflect the movie at all, because what this movie is really about is a widow learning to despise her in-laws more than she already does. And that's where this movie gets into trouble, because there are times, well, frequently, where the movie starts to take itself way too goddamn seriously. So much so, it almost seems like it's kind of self-important. Like, look at this abused woman with these horrible in-laws, and watch as she's going to slowly get revenge. They might be deadites, but she's really getting revenge on who they were in life, as opposed to who they become once they're possessed by Kandarian demons. And I feel like kind of a murderous revenge fantasy that's taking itself too seriously is at odds with the tone of the rest of the Evil Dead franchise. If you want to make a movie like that, more power to you. There are probably 100 million horror movies out there that fit the bill. Like, look at the poster for I Spit on Your Grave. That's all about a girl getting revenge on people who wronged her. There's a fine tradition within the horror genre with those kinds of stories. But with Evil Dead, the moment you start getting a little self-righteous, well, then I feel like you're drifting into a tone and style and atmosphere that does not reflect the rest of the franchise. And you don't need to overthink it when it comes to the premise for a good Evil Dead movie. Usually it features a cast of characters who, through the Necronomicon, either unknowingly release or unleash hordes of deadites onto the world, or get sent back in time, or whatever the case might be. And then over the course of the story, they kill some deadites, destroy the book, and either try and return to their time or just try to survive until dawn. But the stories do not need to be but so complex. And usually at the end, they end in disaster. At the end of the original Evil Dead, we see Ash getting attacked. At the end of Evil Dead 2, he goes back in time. At the end of Army of Darkness, Depends upon which version you've seen. But in the theatrical version, he goes back to the present, but he's still fighting Deadites. But in the original version, he goes way too far into the future. But long story short, the end of the movie should never restore the status quo or give you a feeling of satisfaction. It should always be like, oh, wow, that ended in disaster. What's the next adventure going to be? So who's responsible for this well-intentioned but gory misfire in the Evil Dead franchise? And I should add, my audience, I think about half my audience was having a really good time. And sometimes people just show up for an Evil Dead movie and they're in the mood to have a good time. And so they're almost kind of forcing themselves to laugh and gasp and scream and that sort of thing because they just love the Evil Dead franchise that much. So it won't surprise me if this movie ends up being a modest success and finding a fan base, but I don't think it's going to be as popular as Evil Dead Rise. But the writers on this movie were Florent Bernard as well as director Sébastien Vanicek. And I've never seen any of Sébastien Vanicek's other movies. He's got a couple of short films, and he's got one feature film from 2023 called Infested. It's a movie about spiders. So if you want to see more movies by this director, check out Infested. It's got a 6.2 on IMDb, so somebody's got to like it. And this movie features enough graphic, hardcore violence where I do think Sébastien Vanicek will earn himself some fans. And I'll definitely see whatever movie he does next. I think he's got some talent, but I think his sensibility, he's not quite enough of like a devilish prankster or trickster to really nail the Evil Dead formula. If you read this book, If Chins Could Kill, which I highly recommend, which is Bruce Campbell's autobiography about like the first part of his career, but he talks about what it was like to grow up with Sam Raimi in high school and then college when they started making all their short films and then dabbling in the world of making Evil Dead. But Sam Raimi was the kind of guy where if you were sitting in class, he would start like stabbing you with a pencil, not because he hated you, but because he liked you. And that kind of that prankster mentality also applied to the set. Like Bruce Campbell talks about how one night he sprained his ankle. He was on the ground like writhing in pain, and Sam Raimi just came up with a stick and started just poking him in the ankle once again because he loved Bruce Campbell. That's what you do to your friends that you love and care about. But I think what this movie's missing is that kind of devilish rascal quality that the first three Evil Dead movies have, as well as the show Ash vs. Evil Dead. And for people who have not seen the show, the very first episode was directed by Sam Raimi. And I think it's the best episode of all the seasons. I loved and enjoyed the entire show, but that first episode is particularly good.
Yeah, looking good. Looking sweet.
And what this movie gives us instead is a scenario where we have a widow who's very much an outsider within her extended family. She comes from France. She doesn't really fit in. But to be fair, most of her family members are complete and total pricks. And over the course of the movie, we see how she slowly but surely kind of gets some payback. And it just creates a very different emotion. Like an Evil Dead movie should fuck with you. It should fuck with the audience. It should fuck with the cast. It should just be fucking with everybody, and never at any point should it take itself too seriously. And I just feel like a sense of justice should never be the core of any Evil Dead movie. Once again, Evil Dead movies should fuck with the cast, should fuck with the audience. You should just be laughing at their expense, laughing at your own expense, and it should just be a rip-roaring good time from start to finish. That is the essence, that is the core of the Evil Dead franchise. And it's a franchise that I've loved and adored for decades. I first encountered the Evil Dead franchise when I was like 12 years old. I had a friend who had an older sister that we all had a crush on, but she had a boyfriend who was a horror junkie. And using 2 VCRs, he had created this little like highlight reel of different scenes from horror movies that he liked. And because of the going from one VCR to the other, it was super grainy and there's like static in between the clips. It was not professionally done. But as a result, these scenes from Evil Dead, they were so grainy and then such poor quality, it almost seemed like a snuff movie or almost like a Blair Witch Project kind of like found footage movie. And I remember as a kid, I was like, this is just the scariest fucking shit I've ever seen. And then eventually I discovered the full film. And eventually outgrew the era where I was afraid of it. But then I discovered Evil Dead 2 and had one of my first great, really phenomenal drug experiences with my friends while watching that. And I love these movies so much that a friend of mine and I ended up co-founding what we called the Dead by Dawn Society in high school, where every couple of months we'd get together with a bunch of nerds in a biology lab, and on a TV screen about this big, we would watch the Evil Dead movies, and sometimes like we'd throw in Hellraiser or Night of the Living Dead, but we were a bunch of horror junkies. But the Evil Dead trilogy was the core of our little club, which is why I was so annoyed at the Alamo Draft House last night when I was looking at the little menu of the food they were offering for the experience. They had boomsticks, that makes sense due to Army of Darkness, but then they had a Die by Dawn dog. I was like, Fuck you. It's Dead by Dawn. The movie Evil Dead 2 was Evil Dead 2, Dead by Dawn. They even showed the trailer before the movie started. How do you get something as simple as that wrong? But obviously, Alamo Drafthouse is not affiliated with the makers of the movie.
Evil Dead 2, Dead by Dawn.
But they also handed out these air fresheners that you hang on the rearview mirror in your car, and honestly, it smells like such ass. This is actually more horrifying than the movie Evil Dead Burns, so I wanted to save it as a prop for the video, but now, I'm chucking it and getting rid of it because it's kind of making it a pain in the ass even to record this video. It smells that bad. But getting back to the movie, my big question is, why is there no connectivity with the previous movie, which was an absolute smash fucking hit? Evil Dead Rise had a reported budget of anywhere from 15 to 19 million, and it grossed 147 worldwide. Anytime you're grossing nearly 10 times your budget, well then, that's a concept that people have obviously endorsed. You want to keep those characters around, you want to keep those filmmakers around, and you want to continue to build upon it. Like the original Evil Dead trilogy and followed by the show, the character of Ash is evolving over the course of the story. Now we're in a situation where over the last 10, 12 years, we've had 3 Evil Dead movies, all of which feature different characters and different scenarios where it's such a missed opportunity. There should be a new Evil Dead trilogy with a whole new cast of characters for a whole new generation of Evil Dead fans. And I have no idea why they decided just to wipe the slate clean and start over. And it leads into all these problems in the early part of the story where they're trying to kind of loosely connect it to the story of the Necronomicon and the Book of the Dead and the Kandarian dagger and all that kind of stuff. But they rush through it so quickly, you don't even really know what's happening. And there's 1 or 2 early horror scenes where, and this is just a conspiracy theory on my part, I suspect that they were doing test screenings of this movie and realized that the movie was taking way too long to kind of get up to speed. So they went back and added these early horror scenes because they don't seem to fit in with the rest of the movie at all. Story-wise, they have no connectivity to the rest of the story. And they just seemingly kind of come at random. And I'll just say the movie opens up with 2 people fishing and somehow they encounter a deadite in a lake. Well, it's vaguely reminiscent from a visual standpoint of the earlier movie, but it doesn't really explain how the Deadites got loose, why they're loose, and how the Deadites are going to be kind of, sent home. And usually in every movie, somebody reads the book, the Deadites get out, and then you either burn the book or do something stupid at the end of the movie. But this movie, structurally, is the clumsiest of all the Evil Dead movies, where it keeps tripping over its own feet and bending over backwards, trying to find a way to connect the Deadites to the family at the core of the story when they have an obvious answer staring them square in the face. In the house where most of the action takes place, there are all the journal entries and recordings of the grandfather of the characters who was obsessed with all this stuff. All you have to do is have somebody go upstairs at the beginning of the movie, press play, and boom, the movie starts. But instead, we have 30 or 40 minutes of just total bullshit that could have easily been cut, which is a huge drag on the movie. The movie's got a slightly wrong running time of 1 hour and 50 minutes. It should be 90 minutes. And I think apart from the totally random and kind of unnecessary first scene with the fishermen, it takes a good long while before any horror ingredients start to emerge. And my recommendation to them would have been, look at the intro to Evil Dead 2, where in a couple of minutes they tell you all you need to know about the Book of the Dead and so on and so forth, and boom, you're off to the races with another adventure.
Legend has it that it was written by the Dark Ones, Necronomicon Ex Mortis. Roughly translated, Book of the Dead.
And they could have easily done something similar with Evil Dead Burn and saved us 20 minutes of boredom. But by far the biggest flaw in this movie is the misguided attempt to create kind of a main villain for the story. And I got to go into mild spoiler territory here, so if you don't want any spoilers whatsoever, bail out now. But over the course of the story, the dead husband of the widow, who's the central character, he emerges as kind of the main villain. And while he's possessed by a deadite and he has this unusual look of being kind of half burned, even though he was never cremated, he kind of looks like he was almost cremated. But they try to let him have some of his personality from when he was still human, while at the same time still remaining a deadite. Because once again, this movie is really trying to hammer home the idea that the widow's getting revenge on her fucked up family, and that her husband wasn't that nice a guy even before he got possessed by a deadite. But the last 20 minutes of the movie or so, it's like a one-on-one contest between the two of them, and he just looks so stupid, and the dialogue that he's using is so idiotic. And even when she finally kills him, this is a massive spoiler, but it's so stupid I have to mention it. As she kills him, he goes, I love you. And I was like, oh my God, this is rapidly turning into one of the dumbest horror movies that I've seen in recent memory. And I see a lot of horror movies. I see a lot of dumb ones, but the ending to this movie left a particularly bad taste in my mouth, especially the last shot. And this is the biggest spoiler of all, but the last shot of the movie is just her looking into the camera, looking cool and like looking really hardcore. Like, you're doing it wrong when you try to give the audience a feeling that like justice has prevailed at the end of an Evil Dead movie. She should be laughing and screaming or getting possessed or getting attacked by deadites or being sent into the future, but the movie should end on a bizarre note. Either she should be attacked or like a spell should go wrong. You never end an Evil Dead movie on a heroic beat, especially one that's supposed to like make the audience feel like, ooh, isn't she so cool? At any rate, I was vomiting up in protest for like the last 20 minutes of the movie. But if you can look past the fact that this movie was written by two people who inhaled way too much airplane glue as children and have no idea how to write a story, there are one or two beats where you're like, hey, this is kind of fun. Now we're getting into some vicious terrain that actually might be fun to talk about. Like there's one gag which I think will serve as great cosplay this coming Halloween. And since I've given away some spoilers, I might as well just keep giving away spoilers. But the main character at one point takes a pin to the ear very slowly, and there's this great sound effect. As the pin is going in, and we hear like her eardrum popping. I was like, all right, that's pretty nasty. And when she tries to pull it out, part of it is still stuck in her head, and it stays stuck in her head for a while until she finds some tweezers to pull it out. It's like, all right, this is revolting. And some people out there have a thing about their ears, and I imagine they're all going to be, squealing and writhing in agony watching this. But I feel like if you're going to New York Comic Con or San Diego Comic Con and you just want to have like a fake pen sticking out of the side of your head, there will be horror fans who will kind of, nod in appreciation. And another thing to consider is that perhaps I'm being overly harsh on the movie because for the last like 2 or 3 years, I feel like it's been a really good time to be a fan of the horror genre. We've had a lot of good horror movies served up on a regular basis. And I feel like whether you like low-budget original horror movies or big-budget franchise or even big-budget original movies or foreign horror films or even classic films getting restored and re-released. Like Ken Russell's The Devils, it's getting a big re-release this fall. And if you've never seen The Devils, holy shit, that movie is gonna blow your fucking mind. But I feel like horror fans probably have it better right now than any other kind of movie fan. Whether you like classic movies or straight dramas or superhero movies or science fiction or comedies, no matter what kind of movie fan you are, if you are a horror fan, it's like you've won the lottery because the last couple of years has just been all about giving us one great horror movie after another, and also just so much variety. Like some people like horror movies like Hokum and Oddity, and some people like horror movies like Terrifier 3, and I feel like everybody is getting great examples. And coming up in the not-so-distant future, like we have the South Korean horror film Hope, which looks fucking killer. We have a superhero horror movie or supervillain horror movie, Clayface. And we've got Robert Eggers coming back with more classic horror with the Werewolf. So it's like, once again, like the good meals just keep coming our way. And when a lot of good meals have been coming your way, well, then if you eat a meal that's a little bit off, you're like, oh, like fuck that. I want to get back to eating the good stuff. And that's the way I feel about Evil Dead Rise. It's perfectly adequate. It's perfectly fine. It's perfectly harmless. It's not going to do any lasting damage to civilization or anything like that. But if you love Evil Dead 2 Dead by Dawn, Army of Darkness, Ash vs. Evil Dead, or the Evil Dead remake, or Evil Dead Rise, once again, I just feel like this movie compares unfavorably to all of the above. But who knows, maybe with Evil Dead Wrath, they will bounce back. And it seems like what they're probably going to continue to do is just have each Evil Dead movie be like a different chapter or a different installment in an overall anthology. New director, new cast every time, and which means that some of them will be really good, some of them will really suck. But I wouldn't mind if somebody were to try to do a new Evil Dead trilogy, because as long as I'm alive on this earth, I will continue to watch any movie called Evil Dead. And I'll be 90 years old saying, it was better back when these guys did it. Rah! But that's fine. I mean, like the Evil Dead brand has a lot of loyalty and has decades of diehard hardcore fans. I just feel like we should expect more from any movie with Evil Dead in the title. So that's all I've got to say about Evil Dead Burn. If you enjoyed it, more power to you. Let me know in the comments below what jumped out at you. Hell's going on? Sorry, I'm getting distracted. Some noise outside. But if you enjoyed this video, please consider liking, subscribing, hitting that notification bell. Hope everybody has a great weekend watching the live-action Moana remake. And I'll be back at you later today with my 50th anniversary review for Outlaw Josie Wales, and on Sunday with my box office breakdown. But thanks again for watching, and more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.